righty, my clock has ticked over to noon here on the West Coast, at 3 o'clock for the folks on the East Coast, various other times for the folks in between. We are going to be talking today about data storytelling, and we've been doing a lot of data storytelling discussions. This one's going to be a little bit different because this is going to take a step back from the actual visualizations and the storytelling and talk about what you need to do ahead of time to set yourself up for success in data storytelling. So this is going to be a little bit different in terms of how it approaches the topic. So it should be an interesting one for all of us today. Just for the purposes so that everybody knows this and that all the various states that have rules on such things will be happy, we are recording this video. So we are recording this. It will be made available in an email to everybody who registered for this class, even if they are not able to attend. We'll send that link out along with the slide deck after this is over. This will also be posted along with the past webinars that are there on our YouTube channel. That's a relatively new thing that we've been doing, but we post our past webinars there so that people can take a look at them, which is going to be particularly handy for this one because I am going to make some callbacks to some of the things we've talked about in our earlier data visualization webinars this summer. So super fun and exciting stuff. So to get everything rolling along today, we're Acorn Learning, where Head Start goes to sustain positive change. One of the biggest things that we focus on is professional development oriented towards management approaches, towards quality improvement, and the use of data to make programs better. So if you're looking for ways to sustain quality change in your programs, we've got lots of different options. And I'll talk about those when we get to the very end of the discussion today. So today is pretty straightforward. We're going to have some webinar basics. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use the webinars. I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling, and then I'm going to spend the bulk of the time today talking about how to set yourself up for success and to provide some examples of things that you can do right now so that you're going to be able to tell good, strong stories, confident that the data reflects reality a year from now, 10 months from now, 9 months from now, and so on. So what are the things you're going to do today to set yourself up for success in the future? And then I'll talk a little bit about what's happening at Acorn, and then we'll have a question and answer at the very end. So for the basics, for anybody who doesn't know who I am, I'm our Chief Learning Officer here at Acorn Learning. My job is to create really cool learning events. So my job is basically to make sure that when we do any kind of a training program, whether it's a free webinar or a 5-minute video on YouTube or one of our classes, that you're able to go back into your program and really apply what you've learned. Ideally, you'll have something you can take right back into the program with you and use as soon as it's over. So there's going to be a couple things like that today. You might put those into practice in the afternoon. Although if you're on the East Coast, it might have to wait till tomorrow. West Coast folks, you might be able to do it this afternoon because it's still early here. So webinar basics for us today. Again, this webinar is being recorded. The link to the recording will be shared with everyone who registered, whether they're here or not. And this will also appear on our YouTube channel so that people can check it out now and in the future. Live captioning is turned on, so you should be able to see the captions for all the things that I'm saying if you want that to help you follow along with everything. Our participants are muted until we get to the Q&A period. We do turn the recording off at the start of the Q&A. So if you want to unmute and ask questions, you will not appear on the YouTube channel. We do have a short anonymous survey at the end of this webinar. We do take those really seriously. It's short, but there's some information in there that's important to us. Please take the time to fill that out and help us out with that at the very end. The slide deck will be emailed to everybody at the conclusion of the webinar, along with the link to the recording. If you have any questions at any time as we go through the presentation today, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Sometimes I may address the question right off the bat. Other times I may leave it to the Q&A, but definitely just drop that question in the chat. If you've got a question at all, anywhere about any of the things we're talking about, please feel free to just drop that in the chat at any time. Don't feel like you have to hold it to the Q&A. If it comes up, just put it in there as we're going along, and we can tackle it at the right time as we go through. So one of the big things that I'm going to do in the very beginning is talk a little bit about storytelling with data. I'm not going to cover that extensively because we actually have done that in 2 prior webinars. So in May and June, we had 2 webinars specifically dealing with nuts and bolts of storytelling with data, how to build visuals, what the visuals want to look like and things like that, how you link them to the stories you're trying to tell. And so I'm not going to repeat all that content here because I don't have time. But if you missed those and you weren't registered, so you couldn't get the recordings, you can check both of those videos out on our YouTube channel. So on YouTube, we are at Acorn Learning. There's a little link here. So when you get this presentation later in the day, you can just click that hyperlink and go. Or you can check us out at Acorn Learning on YouTube. And we put up a bunch of different content up there. It's still relatively new for us, so we have lots of things up there you can check out. I will give more of a full plug for it later, but right now, if you are interested in those kinds of things about what should my visuals look like and when should I use different kinds of visuals, those 2 webinars are ones you're going to want to check out. So when we talk about data storytelling in general is communicating a narrative that engages and connects to an audience to convey a message, whatever that message might be. When we talk about data linked to storytelling, one of the biggest things that's always important for us to remember is that human beings don't really remember the data part of our storytelling. They remember the human part of our storytelling. So when we are using data to enhance our storytelling and to make our storytelling more effective, the data is never the center of the story. And this is just a thing about humans. Numbers are abstract for us. They're conceptual. Other human beings are not. They are part that really lands with us. And an example of this is one of the examples that I've used before, is this is a box and whisker plot. And if you're a statistician, this is great. This is awesome. The problem is that this is not an easy thing to understand. And in a larger presentation, you usually forget what's on here within seconds. If I have a really nice picture of a mom and her baby, you're going to remember the mom and her baby picture a lot longer than you're going to remember a box and whisker plot. Even if you have a much simpler graph, like a traditional column chart or bar chart or a pie chart, the human brain is wired for people. We are social animals. We engage with other people and we remember other people because we feel that they're like us. Numbers are not like us. Box and whisker plots, definitely not like us. So when you are storytelling and you are using data, everything you want to talk about is going to be linked back to a person. But data matters because data will generalize that story. There's this story I told you about this person. That person's story represents 150 other people that all participate in our program. I just don't have time to tell you all their stories. So I told you this one story, but there are 150 people just like this person. And if we can do this and this and this to help them connect with the services they need to get their children engaged with the idea of education and school and the importance of attendance, then we can have a huge impact on all 150 of those people's lives. Or if you're telling a larger story at a state association level, or you're going to the big NHSA lobbying festival that happens every September, and you're saying, I want to talk about the 850,000 families in all of Head Start. I'm going to tell you one story, and this person represents 850,000 families all over the country. That's where data comes in. It generalizes the story and it adds that exclamation point. This is what is really important when we're telling stories with data to remember. We are telling human stories and engaging about people, and then using data to really put a giant exclamation point at the end and to communicate the broader importance of the individual stories we're telling. So there's a thing that people forget in this process, and that's that you actually have to have data in a usable form in order to tell those stories. And that's actually a trickier thing than it sounds. In Head Start, you are collecting vast, like truly vast amounts of data, and taking that data and translating it into a form that's usable for the stories that you want to tell using the visualization tools that you have readily available to you in the time frame you have with the skills you have. This is one of the things that can be challenging. One of the reasons it's challenging is we often don't think about what stories we're going to tell and where that data is until we're a fair distance into the process of collecting and putting that data together. So at the end of the year, you're looking back saying, these are the stories I want to tell. That's not the way to go. Start now thinking about the stories you will want to tell at the end of the year, and how do we make sure that everything we're doing throughout the year in our collection, our coding, our entry, and our analysis of data, how does this all support putting us in a good place to be able to tell the stories at the end of the year? And some of what I'm going to talk about today is just kind of standard ideas about how you use data. Some of it comes from lessons from our data analyst certificate course, where people have come in with particular projects and run into challenges. So I'm going to have some general examples, and I'm also going to have some specific ones. So planning around data is critical. Right now, at the beginning of the year, let's just say you're all busy, and we'll all laugh at how ridiculously understated that line is, because things are crazy right now. You have a million things going on. And right now you have a ton of stuff that is absolutely live or die requirement. You have to do these things to keep your grant. It's not optional. They have to be right at the centerpiece of your focus. You have enrollment requirements. You have all of your 30, 45, 60, 90-day requirements, and so on. All these things are out there. It's easy in this environment to not really be thinking about the story you're going to tell 9 or 10 months from now, using all this data that you're collecting about all these things that you're doing. I'm going to suggest that you do want to think now about a lot of these different things that are going on, so that you're planning and making sure that you're getting what you need to tell the stories that you want to tell. This is especially true if you have anything new or anything that's changed that you've brought to the table. Every year you have these new things. Anyone who's a Child Plus user, more and more stuff goes to Child Plus Online. So it's collected in a slightly different way, but the reporting is a little bit different. There's lots of little quirks to that. You might have a new family outcomes tool this year. The old one wasn't quite working. You're implementing a new one. If you're in California, the DRDP 2025, is coming, and there's the early adopters this year who are switching over to a new revised version of this tool. And anybody using it this year is going to be in a weird world. You're the early adopter group. So all of the main DRDP support stuff is still on the 2015. You're going to be using the 2025. You have a whole separate siloed world for your tools. Okay, great. How do I know that everything involved with any of these new things is working out the way that we want it to? At the end of this year, how do I know that I'm going to tell the story I want to tell, which is the story of our success? How do I have that information? How do I have that data? How do I know that I'm going to be in that position to tell that story with the data that I have? That's what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to organize now to use our data later, identifying the stories we are going to want to tell, identify the data you need to tell those stories. We're going to evaluate the collection, coding, and entry strategies of the data workflow, so that we know that what we are getting is data that we are going to be able to use at the end of the year to do the things that we need to do. So the idea here is we're going to set ourselves up for success. The big thing that we want to do is say, what can I do right now? What kind of things can I have as part of a structure that will set me up for that success later on? And this is a big piece of it. The goals here, you got 5. What is it that you're going to tell stories about? What are you trying to tell those stories about? What's that story going to be? Some of them, the stories are stories you've told every year. All of our children were successfully identified as having needs in particular areas or not having needs in particular areas. If they had needs, we connected them to the service that met those needs. You're doing that in 40 different ways in 40 different areas all across your program. So you know you're going to try to tell those stories. Some you have to tell because they're in things like reviews and stuff for the PIR. But there's also going to be things where, hey, we've got this thing we tried this year and it really worked well. And it might be great to use in recruitment. And so it might emerge as the year goes on that you have a really cool story that you can tell to people who are thinking about joining your program. Or you had some new thing and you weren't sure if it was going to work and it was just fantastic. And you want to tell that story everywhere. And maybe you have something that was new and it sounded like it was going to be great and it didn't work so well. So that's going to be an internal story that you'll share about how can we do this better next year. What specific data do you need in order to tell those stories? How do you collect that data? Is that data in a usable form? Just because you've collected it doesn't mean you're going to be able to get it in a form that you can visualize using Excel or other tools. Lastly, is this high quality data? Now, I want to just put a definition here. Data quality is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. People use different definitions. The definition that I always use is high quality data reflects reality well enough that you can rely on it. If you use it for analysis and decision making, you will be making decisions based on the real world. If you have a definition where high quality data is perfect data, you will never get there because we're all human beings and we have lots of things going on in our lives. So high quality data just means it reflects the real world well enough to make good decisions from it. So there's a bunch of different things that are going to come into this. One of the biggest is, what kind of stories do we want to tell? I definitely do want to highlight a couple pieces to this puzzle. One of the biggest is that stories that you have to tell because you're getting reviewed this year, stories you have to tell because your grant is up for renewal, those stories are important. Don't forget that there are other stories that are important. You have an enormously busy fall, and your staff is going to be working like crazy to make sure that everything needs to get done. A bunch of things that line staff are working with are often just presented to them as things that they have to do, and they don't really see results of that. Take a moment at the end of this period where you're doing all of those requirements, look back and highlight the success of the hard work of your staff in hitting all the things you need to hit. Don't treat all these requirements like, oh, it's a line we have to hit every year, so we just operate on that assumption. Acknowledge the hard work that it took to get there, and do that with storytelling that has that data exclamation point on it. 99% of our kids got screened for this, and the 1% of kids didn't. Their parents just refused to do it. That is an accomplishment because staff worked hard to make that happen. And don't just focus your stories on those bigger picture kind of requirement things. Have some things, celebrations, congratulations. If there's a particular area where your staff has definitely gone to an enormous amount of effort to make things better this year, how can you tell the story of that to acknowledge the hard work that they've done? Brag points are another big part of this, especially if you're thinking about, hey, next year in recruitment, is there something that I can use when I'm talking to families in the community? And visualizations on this are going to be really simple. Go back and check out the June webinar on how to make those. But brag points that you're going to use for recruitment, that's a huge deal. You can have a nice, simple image for that you can go, but base it on reality. So what data would you need for that? Reviews, if you have reviews, especially this year when it's super exciting because FA1 and FA2 are out, and now we have comprehensive program review and all these other things. We don't quite even know what they are yet, but you know they're coming, and it's going to be the same people doing the reviews. So you know a lot of it is going to be at least similar to what's been there in the past. You also know that you're going to have to report out to the boards, policy councils, and the rest of them. So what kind of stories are you telling it? How do you want to tell those stories? Make a list of the stories you want to tell. When I'm saying this, also remember, this is going to be appropriate to your role. Don't feel like you have to say, this is every story your organization is going to tell, because that's a vast group. Also know your organization can't tell every single story. Identifying the stories you want to tell early helps you prioritize and focus on the stories that are most important. Motivate, congratulate, celebrate. I talked about this already, but don't forget this. This is one of the most important things. You are allowed to talk about how much effort people have put in. Sometimes it's staff, sometimes it's families. You might have a new program this year, and you're asking families to stretch a little bit. They're all working right now, and hey, every Head Start family is living in poverty. Every family in poverty is stressed right now because God knows what's going to happen next month or the month after or in the spring. So if there's something where they've gone to great efforts and accomplished, or even a subset of families have gone to great efforts and accomplished things, share that. Anytime you want to show your accomplishments, do that, because it's important to do that. I'm going to use an example here of data storytelling, and I'm going to do this to frame a series of things that are coming in the next slides. So for those of you who are in the June presentation, you've seen this before. This is a 10 by 10 grid. Each of these two squares has 100 little icons representing a baby. The green icons are the children with a medical home. So this is a percentage of kids in the program with a medical home at the time of application on the left-hand side, and at the end of the first year on the right-hand side. And I have a little call out. 36% of children had a medical home at the time of application. If you're noting the title here, children with ongoing source of continuous accessible healthcare, that's the plain language definition of a medical home. When children had been in the program for a full year, at the end of the first year, 96% of them had a medical home. This is a very simple, very straightforward representation of a pretty simple characteristic. Does this child have a medical home? This visual representation is one that's easy to use, especially when you put a little animation in the presentation and put it in there. But in order to tell the story that 96% of the families that participated in your program at the end of the first year in the program had a medical home, had a source of continuous accessible healthcare. To tell this story, you have to have the data that goes under it. So what do you need in order to tell that story? Well, you have to have the medical home status for each child at two different moments in time, at the application and at the end of the first program year. Some data systems will just have a flag to indicate whether or not a child has a medical home. And when you switch that flag to yes, it doesn't retain the past information to show that at the beginning of the year, it said no. If you use a data system that's set up that way, that means that you are going to want to export the data at the time of application for your children so that you can make that comparison. This is the kind of thing that you need to think about ahead of time in order to make sure that you are doing. If you have a data system that has the application information separate, so that in the application you see no medical home, and there's a health event or something else later that indicates they acquired a medical home, then you can tell the difference without having to do anything special or different time of year exports. But the reason you think about visuals is even something that's really easy can sometimes be a little more complicated than it looks. There are things that look simple, and when you look at how they're set up in your platforms, not always as simple as it sounds, especially when you're looking at things over time, because the over time stuff is not always built into the systems in the way that we'd ideally like. So you're going to want to consider the details of the story that you're trying to tell when you're trying to tell it. You might have families in your program that have been with you for 3 years. This child came in early Head Start, and they're transitioning into Head Start, and they haven't even graduated yet. And when they first got in the program in that first year, can you see in the data what their first year was like? Do you have that? And then you have other questions. Sometimes you see a visualization, you're looking at it going, okay, this is interesting. Why did you say that it's at the child level instead of the family level? Sometimes 10 years ago, somebody made a decision in your program about how to tell the story, and you're still telling the story that way because that's what you do. Is there a slightly different way to tell the story that might be more effective? If you are going to talk about medical home in the context of, for instance, a family screening tool that identifies needs and connects to services, it might make more sense to be able to talk about it at the family level, so you're using the family at both parts of the conversation. So these are the kind of things that you're going to think about. These are the kind of things that you want to have in mind when you're looking at this stuff early on. And the idea here is you think about the story, you think about the visual you want to use. What data do I need? Is there anything about how we gather that data that we want to think about? So this is the big step then. I know the story I want to tell. I've thought about how that stuff comes through. Now, what specific data do I need to tell that story? This is where it starts to get really down into the weeds, but it's important to do that because if you want to tell a story and you want to use data, you have to know specifically where in your platforms this data is and how you get at it. And so you have to think specifically, what exactly do I need and how do we store that data? Also, who's responsible for accurate collection, coding, and entry in the workflow? You can say, I know that in this report, there's this data point. Okay, well, how does that data point get in there? So if you run into a question where the quality isn't what you'd expect, you can do something about it. And what tools do you have to ensure that the data quality is there? Is this particular piece of data that you're going to need to go get to tell your story, do you have monitoring and tracking that ensures that it's being collected? Well, first and foremost, collected at all. Is it in there? Does everybody do it in the same way? Is it accurate? And so on. So what data you need is a big part of this. So a lot of times what's going to happen is if you have a new question, you might not collect the data at all, or it's collected on paper and it's not aggregated in your platform, so you can't find it. You can't get at it. So your question here is, wow, we're not collecting this. Okay, fine. That's actually very common with a lot of new things. How do you go about collecting it? Program management platforms, your Child Plus, COPA, Go Engage, are the easiest because that's where most of your data is stored. But they also have limitations. If you have something where you're already doing something that's a health event, like let's say that you are doing a physical, and this year you want to add a couple of additional things that you want to get from the physical, the information about the physical the child has. Okay, fine. You can create a custom module embedded in the health event, and the platform can handle that pretty easily. But you might have something that can't be embedded that way. It's not tied to something that's already built in. There's no way to do it. And maybe you have to create a custom module that's all on its own. This is the kind of challenge that you can face. And some systems are easier to customize than others. Going outside your program management platforms can be trickier because now if you're just filling in an Excel spreadsheet or you're using a Google form or an MS365, the Microsoft Forms platform, that might be a little different because now the data is someplace else. But it also might be a lot easier to implement it in practice. So how are you going to go and collect the information you want? How are you going to get that information together? And then how do you have a record of that information? A lot of times when you actually do collect data, then there's a kind of a question of, okay, well, all right, great. How do I actually look at this? How do I understand the source of this data? What's the origin story of this data? Part of that is sometimes you have a story you want to tell and you know that there's a piece of data out there. Does the data actually show what you think it shows? And this is where the lessons from our data analyst certificate program really come into play. People will come in with very clear ideas of the project that they want to do. And they don't really work with this necessarily themselves, but they've heard for years about how there's this information and it's stored in Child Plus and they're already go get it. And then they go actually get it. And it's not what they expected it to be. Sometimes it's, oh, they talk about it this way, but it's really not collecting the information the way that they said it was. Other times, they're only collecting part of what needs to be known. And then in the worst case, site A is collecting it one way, site B is collecting it another, site C isn't collecting it at all. And so there's real data quality issues. So one thing that you're really going to want to think about is, how do I understand this? Why are we doing all this stuff ahead of time? Because if you do encounter challenges, you can fix them if you encounter them in September and October. If you find them in May and June, you may not be able to do the things you need to do to change things to make the data usable in the way that you want to do it. Sometimes, no matter how early you find it, you can't change it within a program year because the changes are too big. But other times, little tweaks can make a huge difference. What does this look like in practice, and how could I bring this back to my program? Well, I have 3 examples of tools that you can use, and they're going to go from general to specific in addressing these questions about how am I going to use this data? How can I go find it? Where is it? How do I understand how the process works? So this is a data inventory exercise, and you can do this a bunch of different ways. Word file, where you just create a little template with these different columns in it, and you go through this exercise. I definitely don't recommend that anybody try to do this with all of the data collected in your program. Focus on the story that you are most interested in, identify the data that you need, starting generally and moving more specific. These are the exercises that work for that. So we have a couple columns here. First, we have data type. This is a general description of what it is we're looking for. So in the first row, child assessment and school readiness goals. That's what we want. We want to be able to look at how did our kids do at achieving the school readiness goals that we've set as a program. Where does the data live? It's a California program. They use Learning Genie. So they have Learning Genie as the main source, but it's also stored in DRDP Online because you have to report all of those scores to DRDP Online. How much data do you have? 2021, 22, 22, 23, and so on. You have 3 full program years of data. And this might be updated to be 24, 25, 25, 26, depends on how long you have it. I would recommend that you only really focus on the years that you want to actually be part of your visualization and storytelling. So you might have 20 years of data for certain things. You don't necessarily need to go back that far or record them here. Focus on what you need. Do you have existing visualizations? None. There are none that are used in this. And I know that if you're Learning Genie users, you're going to tell me, oh, Learning Genie has all these great graphs and charts and everything. But what visualizations are used to tell the story you want to tell? If there are no existing visualizations that you're currently using in storytelling, that's where you put none. And then notes. Readiness goals were revised in 23-24. So comparing before that to after that, you can still say met exceeds, but there are different standards. So in the existing visualizations and the notes, you can include that additional information. This is a broad, general way of looking at things, saying, what is it that I need to go chase down? Where am I going to go looking for it? And what are the parameters? This is a broad starting point that lets you get a sense of what is it that I'm going to need and where do I have to go looking for it. Great starting point to get things rolling along and to get an idea of, okay, well, how exactly am I going to need to engage with the data? And the nice part about this, short, concise, you could put this on a whiteboard and go through it. You can do this in a bunch of different ways. A greater level of detail is a data responsibility exercise. I now know where things are. Okay, now I need to understand the workflow. I need to know everybody who's engaging with this data and how it works. This exercise, talking about who's responsible for what kind of things around the data over time, will help you to see how everybody who's involved is engaged with the workflow and helps to identify the pieces of the workflow for workflow analysis. So content, in this example, it's ERSI, type of data, attendance data, format, it's digital, it's all stored in Child Plus. Staff responsible now, we have multiple staff. They're responsible for different pieces of what's going on with the collection of this data and the use of this data. And this is attendance data, so it's relatively straightforward. But here we're including monitoring, tracking, who's evaluating to make sure things are done on time and correctly, and what's the timeline that they're operating in. So staff responsible, we have a range of staff. We have details on those responsibilities. This example also includes an important piece of this, which is if you go look at the data entry clerk or the ERSI coordinator, you see that these, if you're on a really small screen, I'll read it for you really quickly. They review or monitor attendance patterns through Child Plus reports, and then it lists the reports that they use. So there's a couple things that you do here. One, you know what they're doing and how they're doing it. And two, these are the reports where the data that you're going to go looking for is in the stock reports that are currently in Child Plus. So you know where to start looking. You're not just looking at a list of 50 reports trying to work your way through it. You know that the data that's in use here is going to be in these reports because you're doing this kind of an evaluation. And then the timeline talks about, well, how often is this happening? This timeline portion of it is useful when you're trying to think about, okay, well, we found some strange things in the data. Let's talk about going back to the workflow and examining data quality, things like that. This is a great way to do that. You have a sense of pace and you kind of know who's doing what and how often. So the data responsibility exercise has a lot of value just anytime you want to take a look at a workflow and to really understand it well. But for us, where we're trying to think of how does this data actually make its way from the real world into the systems that we're going to use to look at it, this is an important part of this puzzle. Remember, you might put up a visual that has one little simple data visualization on it and have a thing. And someone might ask you in the Q&A, well, how did you do that? Where did it come from? This is how you know. It also will help you see sometimes that, okay, wow, I thought this was just one little data point, but there's a lot that goes into this. And maybe this is something that we need to kind of think about and engage with more broadly. It's not necessarily going to be as simple as we thought, especially if you're going to change anything. Get a good sense of how things are working now so that you're not changing something without knowing which way it's going to go. The last of these is a data dictionary. And this is all the way down to the detail level. We're talking about the specific field, that specific bit of information is going to get exported. This is one of the reports that we built over the years. It's ACN 003. It's the attendance exports. It's one of the simplest ones, so it fits on a screen like this, which is nice. The header tells you everything about this report. This is a live report. Child Plus stock reports are stock reports. You can just look at it and say, okay, we know everywhere in the country that report number works the same way. When you build a custom report, you want to include information so anybody looking at it, not just the person who built it, but anybody looking at it can understand what they're seeing. So the header information here tells you what parts of the live report system are being set with what settings. So the category is the ADM category, the report is based on the participant, and so on. So somebody who wants to say, well, how is this report built? Because live reports can be built a bunch of different ways. That's how this works. The next is identifying the section of the live reports that the data is coming from so that you can tell exactly where within the Child Plus framework the data is being drawn from. The middle column here is, this gets a little nerdier and you guys may not have to worry about it, but just to explain what it is here, this is the default name in Child Plus. If you don't change it, this is what Child Plus calls it. So if you build a live report, you don't change any of the names for export and it exports out, these are the names that you'll see. Because we typically are bringing this information into other systems, like we're using Power Query in Excel, and we're using Python coding. In the old days, we used to use R coding. We had a different caption label. So we would replace the standard one from Child Plus with ones that were ours. So when I'm looking at that Excel spreadsheet and I want to know what a column contains, I can tell what the column contains by looking at these caption labels. The lowercase, all lowercase letters, agency label I'm seeing in the database is the agency name from the agency section of the Child Plus Live report. You can build these for Child Plus stock reports too, and they're very useful if you need to know, like, where does a particular piece of data come from? You can do that and have it in these data dictionaries at a very specific level. So when you're literally saying, I need this one field from this one report, having a data dictionary on the report that tells you what exactly that field is and how it's structured is pretty useful. The other thing is, if you are building live reports, or if you have custom modules in Child Plus and you're building custom reports for those, or if you are a COPA or Go Engage user and you're having them build custom exports for you, this is very valuable because you want to have documentation where anybody comes in can see what that information looked like. It's also very valuable if you have a library of these, you can actually go see exactly where that specific field you're looking for is so that you can get access to it, especially if it's not in a standard type of report. When you start doing this, one of the things you're going to find is that you are collecting the data, but there's some things that crop up. Common problems. The data is in silos and they don't communicate to each other. Super common in Head Start. Like, really common, happens all the time. And even if we're talking about something where all of the data is in Child Plus, you might not be able to get reports that tie things together. I want to look at obesity and see if the kids that are chronically absent are more of those kids obese than the kids who attend every day. Well, those two parts of Child Plus, there's no reports that you can pull with that. You're going to be pulling live reports, but those live reports don't talk to each other necessarily. So now, how do you design a solution so I can put that data together? The data doesn't include the things we need or want. We're not collecting the information. So how do we go about doing that? And the report that has the data we want in it, when I try to get it out into Excel so that I can use that data and make nice pivot tables and pivot charts and all kinds of cool things, it doesn't work. It's terrible. The format's awful. So these are three different kinds of problems. The first is a technical solution that's pretty straightforward. I have data from one silo. I have data from the other silo. I need to merge those data sets together. I'm not going to tell you it's the easiest thing in the world, but it's a lot easier to do that kind of stuff than it used to be. It used to be you had to go out and you had to learn R coding or Python coding and you merge the data together. Excel will now do these kinds of merges in Power Query with pretty much any version of Excel that has Power Query turned on. So that little Excel sitting on your desktop that you use like 5% of the power of has the ability to merge data sets. Not easy to do, but it can be done. So it's a technical solution. The data doesn't include the things we want. This is a process solution. We don't have what we want. Okay, well, how are we going to get it? We're going to change our process, and we're going to work out how to do that. Finally, there's a platform solution. I really love this report. It tells me what I need, but when I want to put it out in Excel, it's a disaster, and there's no way to make it work in Excel, and I have to hand fill in the information. Okay, this is a platform solution where you go to your platform provider. You go to Child Plus, Copa, Go Engage. All of them are making real serious efforts to accommodate people who want to use their data more effectively. In the old days, you might go ask for a report that gave you the same information in a clean way that could be exported to Excel, and they might just tell you no. Now, in today's world where they are trying to be a lot more engaging and they are acknowledging that people are going to be doing this on a regular basis, it's getting a lot easier to get those reports built for you, especially if you mock up exactly what you want it to look like in Excel and you give it to them and say, give me a report that has the data from this report in this format, plus these 2 extra fields that we would really like to have that aren't in the report, but we're really cool. It's a wish list. When you go to the platform solutions, ask. First thing that can happen is they say that's not possible or no. But one of the things with this is we want to identify these common issues as common issues, and they have a family of solutions that you can bring to the table. So these steps that I've talked about, they get you most of the way. What are you trying to get stories about? Cat's happy, thumbs up. Specific data you need, also a happy cat. Do you collect this data? Wow, we have a whole pride of happy cats here. Is it in a usable form? Great, we've got all of these different things together. We've got all of our things resolved. I'm able to get the information I need in a format that I can put into Excel. I'm looking great. Now, how do I know that the data reflects reality well enough for me to use it? No happy waving cat, head scratchy cat here. This is a bigger challenge. This is not something that you solve by throwing a switch. This is also something that could be a whole webinar in and of itself. So what I'm going to do here is talk really quickly about some of the basic steps that you can take and focus on getting to the point where you can be confident enough that you can move forward with the storytelling. So how do you do that? Well, first and foremost, let's be realistic about data quality. Does the data reflect reality well enough to be usable? That's our standard, not perfection, never perfection, good enough. For some data, you already know the answer. You're using a lot of data for PIR compliance. It better be accurate. Quality better be high because you're reporting it out as part of the things you have to do for your grant. There's other things where you've really been on this for a long time and you know that the data quality is there because it's monitored, it's tracked, you've been working on this for a long time, you've made data quality efforts and it's good. Other times with other data, it's less clear whether the data really reflects what you want. The most common thing where you will run into this is you've been collecting the data for years, but no one's ever really looked at it. The harsh reality of our world is the average person working in Head Start has about 4,000 things to do every day, and they have the time to do about 3,200 of them. And so to make sure that all 4,000 things get checked off the list, efficiency bias comes in. The things that are not emphasized, the things that are not followed up on, that people don't really look at, they're not really going to spend as much time on because they've got something where they know that it is a priority and there is a big deal about it and they're really focused on it. They're going to make sure that that's right and that's correct because they see that it's a big focus. If it's something that you do and then you never hear about and no one's ever come back to you, that's going to have a lot less emphasis. And this is not a negative about the people working. This is a planet Earth reality of when you do not have enough time in the day, you do not have enough resources in your program to do every single thing in the perfect way that everybody wants you to do. You can't be perfect. That's it. These kinds of things are normal human things. They happen in every kind of institution, every organization where people face these kind of resource constraints and time and work constraints. Part of why I say this is when you do encounter these problems, you do always want to approach it on the assumption that there's a structural failure somewhere. And we're going to fix the system and the process and not make it a people thing. All these people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. You have a broken process somewhere. So how do you solve that process? Data quality basics are how you tackle that process. Effective and sustained training. Pre-service is not enough. You can have the best pre-service in the world. You all attend our better pre-service workshop and you have the Acorn come out and do the manager boot camp ahead of time to get everybody set. And you got the most wonderful pre-service that's ever been pre-serviced anywhere where there's a pre-service. It's still just pre-service. It's a ton of information in a short time period, and you have to sustain and support that throughout the year. So effective and sustained training on the importance of why everything's being collected, how they're supposed to do, supported by strong guidance documents. If you have a question, you have this document that tells you exactly what to do at every stage of the process and gives you people that you can contact if you have questions that aren't covered by the document. Monitoring and tracking should explore data on a regular basis. Make sure that it looks right. Make sure that every site is basically doing it in the same way. Look for areas where there are potential issues. If you see pain points emerging, don't wait till it explodes. Tackle the pain points early on. The other thing that I cannot emphasize enough, and is very easy to forget in this, is practice data transparency. Always, always, always be transparent to the extent that you can with anything that you're doing. Tell people why data is being collected. Tell people what the data is going to be used for, especially if they're doing something one time at the beginning of the year and they're doing a bunch of things, they're entering in the system, and then they never see it again. Because if they have no idea what it's for, they don't know how it's prioritized. They don't know that 8 people are doing vital work that depend on this data being accurate. They don't know. And so, again, efficiency bias. If they don't know why something's a priority, it's hard for them to just automatically make it a priority when they have 4,000 other priorities. This is the data quality basics that everybody has to think of. Okay, so you've been drinking from the fire hose as I went through. I'm going to go really quickly so the things that are happening at Acorn, and I'm going to do this about 4 minutes, and then we'll have about 8 or 9 minutes for Q&A. So I'm just going to do this really quickly because this used to be like 3 little things that I could put up there, but now there's a whole giant bunch of stuff that we have coming, which is really interesting. The thing that I think is most fun and enjoyable and might be the most interesting for all of you is the YouTube channel that has been kind of in development for a while is up and rolling. We have 50 videos up there now, 51 if you count the channel trailer. If you're on this video, you don't need to look at the channel trailer. The channel trailer just says, hey, we do professional development for Head Start and community action programs, but there's a bunch of other cool stuff in here. Obviously, you're at a monthly webinar. You like these. There's a playlist that has a bunch of our monthly webinars going back to early 2025 on there, and you can check all of those out. They are the full webinar recordings that are there. We also have a bunch of different information there. One of the things that a lot of people have been kind of curious about is there was a class in the NHSA Academy called Head Start Data Essentials. All of the video content for that class is up. So if you want to get an idea of what some of the fully asynchronous work that we do with the folks at the NHSA Academy are there, you can check out what those videos look like and you can get an idea of what they are. The middle modules for that one are also all case studies. So it's people talking about how they have applied different things related to the topics in the class. There's also a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to talk about a bunch of the other things that we have coming on. If you want more information, we have little 15 and 20-minute pop-up videos where we talk about these things in more detail. But the YouTube channel is really fun. Well, I would say that it's a lot of work, but once you get the hang of it, it's a lot of fun. And I think that if you're on this webinar, you'll find some interesting stuff there. Also, we're going to be adding content to this on a regular basis as we go, and definitely some interesting stuff. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, catch all the cool stuff that's in there. If you see a video you like, click like, because apparently that matters for people who have YouTube channels. So it'll be great. So like and subscribe. It'll be awesome as you get all sorts of fun content. If you are really interested in learning how to do some of the things I've been talking about in terms of visualizing data in Excel, we have an introductory course to data visualization in Excel. It's 4 weeks. It starts in mid-September. And what this class will do is it walks through how to get data out of your various platforms and into Excel. And then we talk about data visualization with a couple different kinds of charts. And we will actually then in the final week do pivot tables and pivot charts. We are providing data sets for attendance and health events. Basically, they're the equivalent of a Child Plus Live report, and walkthrough videos and PDF documentation, step by step, exactly how you go and build a bunch of different things. The PDF documentation is downloadable. Download it, keep it forever. The videos are available for 6 months from the class, and then 6 months after through the learning management system that we use called Canvas. So if you really want to get a good introduction into basic data visualization in Excel, this is a great place to do it. It's 1 meeting a week for 4 weeks. And then you'll have a little bit of time outside of the class where you're learning how to do these things by actually doing them with data sets that we've provided. And even better, there's an office hours component. So if you run into problems or have questions, you can book a 20-minute appointment with me and we can walk through it. And if it takes more than 20 minutes, we'll keep going. But basically, any questions like that can be answered. If you want to get into the higher level of stuff, so now you want to build refreshable templates and you want to start merging data sets, the Data Analyst Certificate, which has been redesigned for the fall of 2025. It's a shorter course than it's been. You'll notice the price has been lowered. If you've been put off by the old $5,000 price, it's much less expensive now. It's also 5 weeks instead of 8. We've condensed some of the project management stuff down that took a couple extra weeks. We made it much more straightforward with more of a focus on the technical skills and then talking about what you're doing. But this is a real fun class if you want to get more advanced skills. The biggest thing here is every single thing that we ask you to do. Again, we have sample data sets, video walkthroughs, and the opportunity to go to office hours if you have different things that you want to explore in more depth. The core of this class is you are bringing a project that you want to do in your program, and you're going to look and see, how can I build a refreshable Excel template? So every week when we have this report that we have to generate, there's no hand typing in. You just download the data, push refresh, and everything refreshes. So dashboards, templates, all that good stuff. So the Practical Data Skills Certificate is basically a series of seminars where we're going to talk about how to put specific things that you want to have as practical data skills, like how to engage staff to really engage with data. How do you do that in practice? How do you build teams that can actually work with data, analyze workflows, things like that? So specific data skills. The focus here is every single one of the sessions will have something you can go back and use in your program right away. The big granddaddy of them all is the data literacy credential through the NHSA Academy. This is a hugely successful program and it's been around for quite a while. It's had some gradual improvements over time. It's a great way. Anybody who's a supervisor, manager, director in Head Start that really wants a strong foundation in data literacy and to really feel a lot more confident using data in an organization, talking about data or in an organization, that's what that's all for. Now, this one's going to be something I'm not going to read through all these. We used to have like 1 or 2 in here, but we have a bunch. I would strongly encourage all of you to check this out when the slide comes through, or check out the Acorn Learning website. All of these are on there. We have a lot. It used to be we had just like 1 or 2 things going on. Now we have a lot. In fact, I'm looking at this and realizing how many of these are me being the one teaching them in October, and I have a busy October. Come join me for the month of October and a lot of fun learning events. We have a lot of cool stuff, a lot of new stuff for the fall. Check us out. It's all good. And I was a little longer on that, but we did make it to the Q&A with 7 minutes left to go. So I will throw things open to you guys. Questions on absolutely anything related to data storytelling, any of the things that we've covered here. Feel free to either type them in the chat or unmute ready to go, because we'll be turning off the recording right about as soon as Nancy pushes the button.